Let me tell you about the time an entitled HOA literally bulldozed through half of my family's farmland, and we weren't even part of their association. It's one of those stories that still makes my blood boil years later, watching those machines tear through generations of hard work, while some suburban warriors tried playing dictator with land that was never theirs to begin with. But stick around, because justice has a way of coming full circle, and what happened next changed how HOAs operate in our entire state. Hey everyone, before I dive into this wild story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Now let me properly introduce myself. My name's Mike Anderson, and I've been working this farmland in southern Illinois my entire life. I'm pushing 60 now, but I still remember walking these fields with my grandfather when I was just tall enough to reach his knee. He'd point out different crops, teaching me about soil conditions and weather patterns like they were bedtime stories. This wasn't just any farm. It was our legacy, 1,000 acres of prime agricultural land that my great-grandfather purchased back in 1918, when this part of Illinois was nothing but open prairie and big dreams. You see, every inch of this land tells a story. That old oak tree by the creek, that's where my dad proposed to my mom in 1962, the Eastern Field. That's where I learned to drive our first tractor, nearly giving my father a heart attack when I almost tipped it into the irrigation ditch. My kids, Tommy and Sarah, grew up climbing that same oak tree, helping during harvest seasons, and learning the value of hard work just like I did. This farm isn't just some plot of land on a map. It's our family's heart and soul, written in rows of corn and soybeans that stretch as far as the eye can see. For decades, we were surrounded by other farms and open land. Our closest neighbors were the Johnsons, about 2 miles down the road, and the Petersons, who owned the dairy farm on the other side. We helped each other out during tough times, shared equipment when needed, and celebrated good harvests together. It was a simple life, but a good one. The kind of life where your word meant something and neighbors respected property lines that had been established for generations. Life had a certain rhythm to it. Spring meant planting and the smell of fresh earth. Summer brought long days, tending to crops under the hot Illinois sun. Fall was for harvest, when the whole family would come together, working from sunrise to sunset. Even winter had its charm, with maintenance work in the barn and planning for the next growing season. We weren't millionaires by any means, but we were comfortable. And more importantly, we were proud of what we'd built. But everything changed when Sunrise Estates happened. It started innocently enough, rumors about developers buying up old man Cooper's property that bordered our eastern fence line. He'd sold his farm to his nephew, who lived in Chicago and had no interest in agriculture. Can't say I blamed him. Farming isn't for everyone, but what happened next? Well, that's when things took a turn I never could have imagined. One day, these fancy SUVs started showing up, filled with people in expensive suits carrying clipboards and tablets. They'd stand at the edge of Cooper's old property, pointing and gesturing like architects plotting the next wonder of the world. I didn't think much of it at first. Property changes hands, that's just life. But then the billboards went up. Coming soon, Sunrise Estates, luxury, living in nature's embrace. Let me tell you, there's nothing natural about cramming 300 homes onto what used to be pristine farmland. But hey, I figured live and let live. They bought the land fair and square, and as long as they respected our boundaries, we could coexist. Boy, was I wrong about that. The first signs of trouble came when the construction started. Those massive yellow machines began reshaping the landscape, turning fertile soil into perfectly level building lots. It was like watching someone paint over a Rembrandt with beige house paint. But still, I kept to myself. They had their property rights, just like I had mine. Then one morning in early spring, just as I was getting ready to start planting, I noticed something odd. There were survey stakes on my land, not just a few feet over the line, but hundreds of yards into my property. These weren't old stakes either. They were bright orange with Sunrise Estates Phase 2 printed on them. Someone had come onto my land without permission and started marking it up like they owned it. I immediately called the development office, listed on their billboard. The receptionist connected me to their project manager, a guy named Richard Maxwell. His response? "Oh yes, Mr. Anderson. We've been trying to reach you about acquiring that parcel. It's been designated as part of our community expansion." Designated? I remember saying. By who? Because I sure as hell didn't designate anything. That's when he dropped the bomb. According to him, their HOA board had already approved plans for Phase 2, which included 500 acres of my land. They were just waiting for the paperwork to go through. When I told him that land wasn't for sale at any price, he actually laughed. "Mr. Anderson," he said, like he was talking to a child, "you might want to check your mail. The community guidelines for Sunrise Estates clearly state that adjacent properties must conform to our development plans." I was speechless. These people, who'd just shown up out of nowhere, thought they could force me to sell my land because their HOA guidelines said so. Land that had been in my family for over a century. Land that I'd never agreed to put under their jurisdiction. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. What happened next would test everything I believed in, about property rights, justice, and just how far some people will go to get what they want. But that's where this story really starts to get interesting. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to hear what happened next, because trust me, this story takes some wild turns. Drop a like if you've ever dealt with an HOA trying to overstep their bounds, and let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar. 2 days after that phone call with Richard Maxwell, I received what looked like an official document in the mail. The envelope had the Sunrise Estates logo emblazoned across the top, making it look like something from a government agency. Inside was a 30-page packet filled with legal jargon and community guidelines, along with a letter that still makes my jaw clench when I think about it. "Dear Mr. Anderson," it began, "as per the Sunrise Estates Community Integration Initiative, your property has been identified as essential to our Phase 2 development. Our records indicate that your agricultural activities are incompatible with our community's aesthetic and environmental standards. We are hereby providing you with a 60-day notice to cease all farming operations on the designated 500 acres and prepare for property transition." The letter went on to cite various municipal planning regulations and community development ordinances that supposedly gave them the authority to do this. They even included a check for $50,000 as a good faith initial compensation offer, like that was supposed to make everything okay. I took the whole package straight to my lawyer, Linda Martinez. Linda's been handling our farm's legal matters for 20 years, and I've never seen her eyebrows shoot up so high as when she read that letter. She pushed her reading glasses up her nose and let out a long whistle. "Mike," she said, "this is the most egregious attempt at property theft I've seen in my entire career. They're trying to use HOA bylaws to claim eminent domain powers, which they absolutely do not have. This isn't just overreach, it's potentially criminal." We spent the next few hours going through their documentation. Turns out they'd created this elaborate web of quasi-legal documents that made it seem like they had authority over all adjacent agricultural properties within a 2-mile radius of Sunrise Estates. They'd even included a clause stating that by continuing to farm within this radius after their development began, I had implicitly agreed to their terms. Linda started drafting a response immediately, but she warned me this might get ugly. "These people have money, Mike," she said, "and from what I'm seeing here, they're not afraid to spend it to get what they want." She wasn't wrong. The very next day, I woke up to find 3 black SUVs parked at the edge of my property. Out stepped Richard Maxwell, flanked by what looked like private security, and a woman who introduced herself as Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president. I met them at the property line, making sure to record everything on my phone, something Linda had advised me to do. Patricia was wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than a month's worth of fuel for my tractors, and she had this smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Anderson," she said, extending her hand like we were at a cocktail party. "I believe you received our packet. We're here to discuss the transition timeline and ensure a smooth transfer of operations." I didn't shake her hand. Instead, I played the video I'd been recording on my phone and spoke clearly. "This is my property. You are not welcome here. Any attempt to enter will be considered trespassing." Richard stepped forward, his face reddening. "Mr. Anderson, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. The development is happening. The plans are approved. You can either accept our generous offer now or what?" I interrupted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Or you'll keep pretending your HOA has powers it doesn't have? My lawyer has already reviewed your documents. They're worth about as much as the fertilizer I spread on my fields." Patricia's fake smile finally dropped. "We were hoping to handle this amicably," she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "But if you insist on being difficult, we have other methods at our disposal. The County Planning Commission has already rezoned this area for residential development." That was news to me, and apparently false news at that. I'd later learned they had only applied for rezoning. It hadn't been approved, and wouldn't be, without my consent. But they were betting I wouldn't know that. They left after about 20 minutes of back and forth, but not before Patricia made what sounded an awful lot like a threat. "Things are changing, Mr. Anderson. Progress doesn't wait for sentiment or tradition. One way or another, this development is moving forward." I called Linda immediately after they left. She wasn't surprised by their visit, but was concerned about their claim regarding the rezoning. She promised to look into it and advised me to install security cameras around the property. It's a good thing I followed her advice, because what happened over the next few weeks was like something out of a movie. First came the surveyors, not on my property this time, but right at the edge, taking measurements and marking points. Then came the environmental assessment teams, claiming they needed to check for agricultural runoff affecting their development. They never stepped onto my land, but they were always there, watching, documenting. The pressure campaign didn't stop there. Sunrise Estates started holding community meetings about their expansion plans. They even put up a billboard right across from my main field entrance, showing their vision for the property, complete with artificial lakes, walking trails, and luxury homes where my crops were currently growing. But the real kicker came when they started spreading rumors in the local community. Suddenly, there were whispers about my farming practices being outdated and environmentally unsafe. They submitted complaints to the county agricultural board about pesticide use, all false, of course, but each complaint required time and energy to disprove. I was starting to feel the strain. Spring planting was approaching, and instead of focusing on my crops, I was spending hours documenting their harassment and responding to baseless complaints. My kids, Tommy and Sarah, started coming out to the farm more often, worried about how all this was affecting me. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was just before dawn, and I was getting ready to start my day when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was coming from the Sunrise Estates construction site, until my son Tommy, who was staying with me that week, burst into the house. "Dad!" he shouted. "They've got bulldozers in the east field." I grabbed my phone and ran out the door, not even stopping to put on my boots. What I saw made my heart stop. 3 massive bulldozers were plowing, through my winter wheat field, with more construction equipment lined up behind them. Richard Maxwell was there with a team of construction workers, along with what looked like private security guards. The audacity of it all. They weren't just making threats anymore. They were actually trying to force their development plans by destroying my crops, probably hoping that once the damage was done, I'd have no choice but to sell. But they clearly didn't know who they were dealing with. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about standing up to bullies who thought their money and fancy lawyers put them above the law. What happened next would not only change the course of this fight, but would end up making headlines across the state. Because sometimes when people push you too far, you have to push back, and I was about to push back hard. The sight of those bulldozers tearing through my winter wheat is something I'll never forget. But what happened in the next few hours would prove that sometimes the good guys do win, especially when they're prepared. Remember those security cameras Linda advised me to install? They were catching everything in crystal clear HD. But I didn't have time to appreciate the irony. I had to act fast. I immediately dialed 911 while Tommy started recording everything on his phone. The next call was to Linda, who answered despite the early hour. "They're bulldozing my crops," I told her, my voice shaking with rage. "Right now, Linda, they've got 3 machines running through my wheat field. Don't confront them directly," she said immediately. "I'm calling Judge Thompson for an emergency injunction. Just document everything and wait for the police." I wanted to jump on my tractor and block their path, but Linda's words kept me in check. Instead, Tommy and I stationed ourselves at a safe distance, phones recording, while we waited for help to arrive. Richard Maxwell noticed us and had the audacity to wave like he was doing us a favor. The county sheriff's department arrived. First, 3 patrol cars with lights flashing. Sheriff Dave Miller, who I'd known since high school, took one look at the situation and immediately ordered all machinery to stop. Richard tried showing him some documents, claiming they had legal authority to proceed with their development plans. "Legal authority?" Sheriff Miller said loud enough for our cameras to pick up. "Son, this is criminal trespassing and destruction of property, plain and simple. Shut those machines down now, or you're all going to jail." The bulldozers finally stopped, but the damage was already done. They'd carved 3 wide paths through my wheat field, destroying about 50 acres of crops in just under an hour. As the sheriff's deputies were taking statements, Linda arrived with Judge Thompson himself. They'd been in the middle of a breakfast meeting when my call came in. Judge Thompson, still wearing his golf shirt and looking like he'd rather be on the course, took one look at the scene and started writing on his legal pad. Within minutes, he drafted a temporary restraining order on the spot, preventing anyone associated with Sunrise Estates from coming within 500 feet of my property. But Richard Maxwell still wouldn't back down. "Your Honor," he protested, "we have documentation showing this land has been rezoned for residential development. Our HOA guidelines clearly state—" "Mr. Maxwell," Judge Thompson interrupted, "unless you want to spend the night in county jail, I suggest you stop talking about HOA guidelines. They hold absolutely no legal authority over Mr. Anderson's property. Now remove your equipment immediately." As the bulldozers retreated, more people started showing up. The local news had gotten wind of what was happening. Apparently, one of the sheriff's deputies had called his cousin who worked at Channel 12. By noon, there were 2 news vans parked along the road, filming the aftermath of what they'd later call the HOA land grab scandal. Linda was in her element, giving statements to the press while simultaneously coordinating with her legal team. "This is a clear case of attempted property theft and criminal destruction," she told the reporters. "The damages here go far beyond the destroyed crops. This was a calculated attempt to force a multi-generation family farm out of business." The story exploded. By that evening, it was the lead story on every local news channel. The images were powerful, bulldozer tracks through golden wheat, law enforcement tape marking the destruction, and aerial shots showing the stark contrast between my farmland and the encroaching development. But the real bombshell dropped the next day. Remember those rezoning claims Patricia Whitmore and Richard Maxwell kept making? Turns out, not only had the rezoning not been approved, but they'd actually forged documents to make it appear like it had been. The County Planning Commission was furious when they found out their letterhead had been used without authorization. The district attorney's office got involved, and things started moving quickly. They executed search warrants on the Sunrise Estates Development Office and the homes of several HOA board members. What they found was staggering. Emails and documents showing this had been their plan all along. They'd targeted several farms in the area, using a combination of harassment, false legal claims, and intimidation to force owners to sell. In one email, Patricia Whitmore had written, "Once we destroy enough crops, their insurance rates will skyrocket. They won't be able to afford to keep farming, and they'll have to sell." The evidence was damning, but what really broke the case open was testimony from a former Sunrise Estates employee. Jennifer Parker, their former administrative assistant, came forward with recordings of board meetings where they openly discussed their strategy of using false HOA guidelines to bully neighboring properties. They thought they were untouchable, Jennifer told investigators. They kept talking about how farmers were living in the past, how we needed to drag this county into the modern era, whether people liked it or not. The criminal charges came down like a hammer. Richard Maxwell, Patricia Whitmore, and 4 other board members were charged with criminal trespassing, destruction of property, forgery, and attempted real estate fraud. The district attorney was pushing for maximum penalties, citing the need to send a message about property rights. But the criminal charges were just the beginning. Linda had been busy preparing what she called the mother of all civil suits. We were suing not just the individuals involved, but the entire development company and their parent corporation. The damage to my wheat field was just the tip of the iceberg. We were going after them for harassment, emotional distress, loss of productivity, and punitive damages. "They tried to use their money to bully you," Linda said during one of our strategy sessions. "Now we're going to use their money to make sure this never happens to another farmer." The civil case would take months to work its way through the courts, but the immediate effects were dramatic. Construction at Sunrise Estates came to a complete halt. Their investors started pulling out, worried about the negative publicity and potential financial liability. The development that was supposed to be their crowning achievement began to look more like a ghost town, with half-finished houses standing empty behind their fancy entrance gates. Local support for our case was overwhelming. Other farmers in the area started coming forward with their own stories of harassment from various developers. The State Farming Association got involved, pushing for new legislation to protect agricultural land from predatory development practices. The whole experience changed me. I'd always been content to keep to myself, to focus on my farming and let the rest of the world go by. But this fight taught me that sometimes you have to stand up not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face the same battle in the future. When the court dates finally arrived, I wasn't sure what to expect. Sure, we had solid evidence, security camera footage, forged documents, witness testimony, and those damaging emails. But I'd been around long enough to know that having truth on your side doesn't always guarantee victory. The criminal cases came first. The county courthouse was packed with spectators, media, and what seemed like every farmer within 50 miles. Richard Maxwell and Patricia Whitmore had hired some hotshot defense team from Chicago, 3 lawyers, in suits that probably cost more than a new tractor, all trying to spin their clients' actions as a simple misunderstanding. Their defense strategy was almost as audacious as their original scheme. They tried claiming they had reasonable belief that their HOA guidelines extended to neighboring properties. They argued that the bulldozing was just preliminary land survey work that accidentally went too far. Their lawyers even had the nerve to suggest that my farm was impeding essential community development and that their actions were in the public interest. Judge Thompson, now in his official robes instead of his golf shirt, wasn't buying any of it. When Maxwell's lawyer tried arguing that HOA guidelines could supersede private property rights, the judge actually laughed out loud. "Counselor," he said, "are you seriously arguing that a private housing association has more authority over private property than the United States Constitution? Because if you are, I suggest you return to law school for a refresher course." The trial lasted 2 weeks, but the jury only needed 3 hours to reach their verdict. Richard Maxwell, Patricia Whitmore, and 3 other board members were found guilty on all counts. The sentencing was even better than we'd hoped. Maxwell and Whitmore each got 18 months in county jail, plus 5 years probation. The others got 12 months each, but the real sting came from the fines, $250,000 per person, plus restitution for the damaged crops. Judge Thompson made it clear this wasn't just about punishing them, it was about sending a message. "In all my years on the bench," he said during sentencing, "I've never seen such a blatant disregard for property rights combined with such calculated malice. This court cannot and will not allow wealthy developers to use bullying tactics to steal land from hard-working farmers." But the criminal case was just round 1. The civil trial was where things got really interesting. Linda had built what she called an airtight case against not just the individuals, but the entire development company and their corporate parent, Platinum Real Estate Holdings. This time, we weren't just talking about damaged wheat fields. Linda brought in experts to testify about the long-term impact on soil quality from the bulldozer damage. Agricultural economists calculated potential crop losses over the next decade. We had psychologists testify about the emotional trauma of watching your family legacy being destroyed. The corporate lawyers tried every trick in the book. They claimed the board members were acting independently. They argued that the company couldn't be held responsible for rogue employees. They even tried to paint me as an obstacle to progress, suggesting that my refusal to sell was hampering economic development. That's when Linda played her ace. She called Jennifer Parker, the former administrative assistant, back to the stand. Jennifer had kept more than just recordings. She had emails going all the way up to Platinum's corporate office, showing they knew about and approved the whole scheme. This wasn't just a few overzealous HOA board members, Linda told the jury. In her closing argument, this was a corporate strategy to use intimidation and illegal tactics to force farmers off their land. They didn't just bring bulldozers to Mr. Anderson's wheat field. They brought a complete disregard for law, property rights, and basic human decency. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, you could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. The verdict? $2, $8 million in compensatory damages, plus, and this was the real shocker, $15 million in punitive damages. Judge Thompson, who also presided over the civil case, added one more twist. He ordered Platinum Real Estate Holdings to place a permanent conservation easement on all the undeveloped land they owned, adjacent to existing farms. This meant they could never build on that land without explicit permission from the neighboring farmers. The aftermath was like watching dominoes fall. Platinum's stock price took a nosedive. Other developers who'd been eyeing farmland in the area suddenly lost interest. The Sunrise Estates project was officially abandoned, with the half-built houses eventually being demolished. But the impact went far beyond just our community. The state legislature took notice. Within months, they passed the Farm Heritage Protection Act, making it illegal for developers to use HOA guidelines or other private regulations to pressure neighboring properties. The law included strict penalties for violations and special protections for multi-generation family farms. Other states started following suit. Farmers' rights groups from across the country began contacting me, asking for advice on fighting similar battles. I even got invited to testify before a congressional committee looking into predatory development practices. The money from the lawsuit, well, most of it went into a legal defense fund for other farmers facing similar situations. The rest went into modernizing our irrigation systems and setting up college funds for my grandchildren. But the real victory wasn't about money, it was about standing up to bullies and winning. Richard Maxwell and Patricia Whitmore served their time and paid their fines. Last I heard, Maxwell was working at his brother's car dealership in Wisconsin, and Whitmore had moved to Florida. The other board members scattered to the winds. Their dreams of getting rich through forced development turned to dust. The land, where Sunrise Estates was supposed to be. It's a community farm now. After Platinum abandoned the project, the county seized the property for unpaid taxes. We worked with the local farming association to turn it into an agricultural education center, where city kids can come learn about farming and where young farmers can get hands-on experience. You might think that after the court cases were settled and the dust had settled, things would go back to normal. But what happened next shows how one victory can spark a movement that changes everything. Remember that agricultural education center I mentioned? Well, it became something much bigger than we'd initially planned. The idea started small, just a place where we could teach kids about farming and help new farmers get started. But it grew into what we now call the Heritage Farm Alliance, and it's changing the way people think about farming and development across the country. The first sign that this was going to be something special came about 3 months after we won the civil case. I was out checking the irrigation system when a convoy of school buses pulled up to the education center. Out stepped about 100 kids from Chicago's inner city, most of whom had never seen a working farm before. Their teachers had heard about our story on the news and reached out about doing a field trip. These kids, who'd grown up surrounded by concrete and steel, were suddenly standing in the middle of a wheat field, feeling the wind in their hair and rich soil under their feet. The looks on their faces, that mix of wonder and curiosity, reminded me of why we fought so hard to protect this land. One little girl, couldn't have been more than 8, tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Mr. Anderson, is it true that you fought the bad guys who tried to steal your farm?" When I told her yes, she looked at me with these serious eyes and said, "My grandpa had a farm in Mexico, but some rich people took it away. He cried when he told me about it." That conversation hit me hard. It made me realize this wasn't just about protecting my farm. It was about standing up for everyone who'd ever lost their land to powerful interests who thought money could buy anything. That's when the Heritage Farm Alliance really started taking shape. We partnered with agricultural colleges, legal experts, and farming organizations across the state. The education center became a hub for both learning and activism. We started offering free legal clinics for farmers facing development pressure. Linda, bless her heart, recruited a network of lawyers willing to work pro bono for farmers in similar situations. But the real game changer came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Parker, the whistleblower from Sunrise Estates, approached us with an idea. She'd been working in real estate development for years and knew all the tricks developers use to pressure landowners. She offered to create a comprehensive guide for farmers, explaining how to recognize and fight these tactics. "The developers always win because they know the system better than the farmers do," she explained. "Let's level the playing field." We turned Jennifer's knowledge into a series of workshops and a detailed manual that we called The Farmer's Guide to Fighting Back. It covered everything from documenting harassment to understanding zoning laws to building community support. We made it available online for free, and within months, It had been downloaded thousands of times. The alliance grew faster than we could have imagined. Farmers from other states started reaching out, sharing their stories and asking for advice. We helped a family in Nebraska save their ranch from a similar HOA scheme. We advised dairy farmers in Wisconsin who were being pressured by a shopping mall developer. Each victory added to our knowledge base and made us stronger. But we weren't just playing defense. We started working with state legislators to strengthen property rights laws. The Farm Heritage Protection Act that passed in our state became a model for similar legislation across the country. We testified at hearings, met with lawmakers, and showed them real examples of how developers were trying to abuse the system. One of our biggest victories came when we helped expose a nationwide scheme by a major development corporation. They'd been using shell companies to buy up small parcels of farmland, then using those holdings to claim HOA authority over neighboring properties. Thanks to our network of alert farmers and legal experts, we caught them early and shut them down before they could do serious damage. The education center itself evolved into something beautiful. We restored the old barn that the bulldozers had partially destroyed, turning it into a classroom and meeting space. The damaged wheat field became a demonstration plot where we teach sustainable farming practices. Even some of the half-finished houses from Sunrise Estates were repurposed. We turned them into dormitories for young farmers doing internships. Tommy, my son, took charge of the educational programs. He developed a curriculum that combines practical farming skills with lessons about legal rights and community organizing. We're not just teaching people how to farm, he likes to say. We're teaching them how to protect their right to farm. Sarah, my daughter, started a program specifically for women in agriculture. She remembered how some of the developers had tried to intimidate her during our fight, thinking a woman would be an easier target. Her program teaches both farming skills and leadership, helping create a new generation of fearless female farmers. The most satisfying part? Watching some of our students go on to fight their own battles, like Maria Rodriguez, a second-generation farmer from California who used our guidelines to stop a tech company from seizing her family's orchard, or the Johnson brothers in Maine who protected their maple syrup operation from a ski resort development. But it wasn't all just fighting and legal battles. We also worked to build bridges between farmers and responsible developers. We created guidelines for what we call compatible development, ways that new housing projects can coexist with working farms without threatening them. Some developers even started seeking our advice, realizing that working with farmers was better than fighting them. The Heritage Farm Alliance has now grown into a national network with chapters in 38 states. We've helped protect over 100,000 acres of farmland from predatory development, and our legal defense fund has supported more than 200 farmers in court battles. But more importantly, we've changed the conversation about development and farming rights. Some people think that once you win a big battle, the war is over. But protecting farmland and farmers' rights is an ongoing fight, and we had to get creative to stay ahead of the developers who kept coming up with new tricks. About a year after we established the Heritage Farm Alliance, we started noticing a disturbing trend. Developers weren't just using HOAs anymore. They were getting sophisticated with technology and social media to pressure farmers into selling. That's when we realized we needed to modernize our approach to fight back. I remember the day this hit home. I was giving a tour of our education center to a group of young farmers when one of them, a tech-savvy kid named Marcus, showed me something on his phone. It was a slick website called Future Communities Initiative that basically mapped out every family farm in our region, complete with estimated property values and what they called development potential scores. They're data mining us, Marcus explained. They're using satellite imagery, social media posts, and public records to identify which farms might be struggling financially. Then they target those farms with aggressive marketing campaigns and lowball offers. That was a wake-up call. We couldn't just rely on legal defenses anymore. We needed to fight fire with fire. Thankfully, Sarah's husband, Jack, is a software developer, and he immediately saw the potential to turn this around in our favor. Jack developed what we now call the Farm Alert Network, a secure online platform that helps farmers share information about development threats and coordinate responses. If a developer starts pressuring farmers in one area, everyone in the network gets notified. We can track patterns, identify aggressive developers, and mobilize support before things get out of hand. Think of it as a neighborhood watch for farmers, Jack explained, but instead of watching for burglars, we're watching for developers who try to use underhanded tactics. The system proved its worth almost immediately. A development company called Green Future Living, ironic name considering they wanted to pave over farmland, had been quietly buying up options on properties around several family farms in the next county. Their plan was to surround these farms with development projects, cutting off access to irrigation water and making farming impossible. Thanks to our alert network, we caught wind of this before they could complete their land grab. We worked with local water rights attorneys to protect the farmers' water access and expose the company's tactics in the media. Green Future Living backed off and their options expired worthless. But we didn't stop there. We realized that one of our biggest challenges was public perception. Too many people saw farmers as obstacles to progress rather than stewards of essential resources. That's when Tommy came up with the idea for our social media campaign, Meet Your Farmer. The concept was simple but powerful. We started featuring short videos of family farmers telling their stories, not just about their struggles with developers, but about their daily lives, their connection to the land, and their role in feeding America. These videos went viral, especially during the pandemic, when people started thinking more about where their food comes from. One video, featuring old Pete Davidson talking about how his great-grandfather homesteaded his land while showing viewers his heirloom tomato greenhouse, got over 2 million views. Another, showing Maria Rodriguez teaching her daughters the same apple grafting techniques her grandmother taught her, was featured on national news. People can't care about what they don't understand, Tommy always says. We're helping them understand why these farms matter. The Heritage Farm Alliance also started using drone technology, not just for farming, but for protection. We developed a program where farmers could document their property boundaries and activities with regular drone surveys. This came in handy when developers tried claiming farmers were abandoning portions of their land or misusing it. One case in particular showed how valuable this could be. The Wilson family, who owned a 300-acre dairy farm near the state line, had been accused by a developer of letting their land go fallow, a common tactic used to justify rezoning. But our drone surveys showed clear evidence of active rotation farming and soil conservation practices. The developer's case fell apart in court. We also started using blockchain technology to create immutable records of farm ownership and activity. It might sound fancy, but it's basically a way to create permanent, unchangeable documentation of a farm's history and operations. This has been crucial in fighting false claims about land use and ownership. But perhaps our most important innovation was the early warning system. Using public records, satellite data, and good old-fashioned network of contacts, we can now identify potential threats to farmland before they materialize. When we see suspicious patterns of land purchases or unusual zoning requests, we can alert farmers and start preparing defenses before the bulldozers show up. Prevention is better than cure, Linda always says. It's easier to stop a land grab before it starts than to fight it in court later. The developers have noticed our new capabilities, and some have actually started approaching us for consultation before planning their projects. We've helped design several agriculture-friendly developments that include buffer zones around farms and protect key resources like water access and road rights of way. Last month, we even had a major victory when the state legislature passed what we call the Digital Defense Act, a law requiring developers to disclose their use of data, mining and targeting technologies when approaching farmers about land sales. It's the first law of its kind in the country, and other states are looking to copy it. But we're not resting on our laurels. We're currently developing an AI system that can analyze development patterns and predict where the next threats might emerge. We're also working on a mobile app that will give farmers instant access to legal resources and support networks. Sometimes the biggest threats aren't the ones making headlines. While we were busy fighting off aggressive developers and creating new ways to protect farmland, a different kind of threat was quietly emerging, one that would test everything. We'd built with the Heritage Farm Alliance. It started with what seemed like good news. A company called AgriGrow Solutions began offering local farmers partnership opportunities that looked amazing on paper. They promised guaranteed crop prices, state-of-the-art equipment leasing, and technical support, all while letting farmers maintain ownership of their land. Mark Thompson, whose family farm bordered mine to the north, was the first to sign up. "Mike," he told me, "this is the future of farming. They're offering price guarantees 20% above market rate, plus they'll upgrade all my irrigation systems at no cost." Something about it felt off to me. I'd been around long enough to know that if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. I asked Jennifer Parker, our former whistleblower-turned-research expert, to look into AgriGrow Solutions. What she uncovered was disturbing. AgriGrow was actually a subsidiary of Platinum Real Estate Holdings, the same company behind the Sunrise Estates disaster. They'd just changed their tactics. Instead of using bulldozers and HOA guidelines, they were using contracts and fine print to gain control of farmland. Jennifer dug deeper into their contracts and found what she called poison pills, clauses buried in the legal jargon that would essentially give AgriGrow control over the land without actually owning it. If a farmer missed a single equipment payment or failed to meet their strict production quotas, AgriGrow could take over operations. "It's brilliant in an evil sort of way," Linda said when she reviewed the contracts. "They're not buying the land, they're trapping it. Once a farmer signs this, they're locked into a system designed to make them fail." We immediately called an emergency meeting at the Heritage Farm Alliance Center. Farmers from 3 counties showed up, including Mark Thompson, who was already having second thoughts about his AgriGrow contract. During the meeting, we unveiled a wall chart showing how AgriGrow's parent company had created a web of subsidiaries, all aimed at acquiring farmland through different means. Besides the partnership contracts, they were also behind a new bank offering specialized agricultural loans and a farm equipment company pushing expensive lease agreements. "They're playing a long game," I explained to the crowd. "Instead of fighting us directly, they're trying to turn farmers into sharecroppers on their own land." The revelation hit hard, especially when Mark stood up and shared the details of his agreement. The guaranteed prices came with production quotas that were nearly impossible to meet. The free irrigation upgrades required him to buy all his supplies from AgriGrow-approved vendors at inflated prices. Even his choice of crops was restricted to what AgriGrow demanded. "I feel like an idiot," Mark admitted. "I was so excited about the guaranteed prices that I didn't read the fine print carefully enough." But Mark's situation gave us an opportunity. Linda believed we could use his case to expose AgriGrow's predatory practices. With Mark's permission, we decided to fight the contract in court while also launching a public awareness campaign about these new threats to family farming. Tommy and Sarah organized what we called the Read the Fine Print campaign. We created detailed guides showing farmers what to look for in agricultural contracts. We held workshops on understanding legal terminology and identifying predatory clauses. The Heritage Farm Alliance's legal team developed a contract review service offering free analysis of any farming-related agreements. The campaign struck a nerve. Farmers from across the country started sending us contracts to review. We discovered similar schemes operating under different names in multiple states. It was like playing whack-a-mole. Every time we exposed one predatory company, another would pop up with a slightly different approach, but we were getting better at spotting them. Our Farm Alert network now included a database of known predatory companies and their subsidiaries. We could track their activities and warn farmers before they gained a foothold in new areas. The legal battle over Mark's contract became our new front line. AgriGrow fought hard, bringing in a team of corporate lawyers who argued that their contract terms were standard industry practice. But we had an ace up our sleeve, evidence showing that AgriGrow had deliberately designed their contracts to force defaults. A former AgriGrow executive, inspired by Jennifer's example, came forward with internal documents showing the company's true strategy. They called it Operation Harvest, a 5-year plan to gain control of prime farmland by setting farmers up to fail through impossible contract terms. The case dragged on for months, but the outcome was worth the wait. The judge not only voided Mark's contract, but also issued an opinion that would have far-reaching consequences. He ruled that agricultural partnership contracts couldn't include terms that effectively stripped farmers of operational control over their land. This ruling became known as the Thompson Standard in farming circles, and it gave us a powerful tool to fight similar schemes. State legislators used it as a model for new laws, protecting farmers from predatory contracts. The victory in Mark Thompson's case was just the beginning. What happened next would change the landscape of agricultural contracts nationwide and expose an even bigger threat to America's family farms. After the Thompson Standard made headlines, my phone started ringing non-stop. Farmers from every corner of the country were calling with similar stories. The details varied, but the pattern was the same: big companies using complex contracts to gain control over family farms. But one call in particular caught my attention. James Chen, a second-generation farmer from California, had discovered something disturbing. While reviewing contracts from different agricultural companies, he noticed they all used nearly identical language in certain clauses. It wasn't just coincidence. These companies were working together. It's like they're all reading from the same playbook, James told me during a video call with the Heritage Farm Alliance team. I found the same predatory clauses in contracts from companies that are supposed to be competitors. Linda immediately saw the implications. If multiple companies were coordinating their contract terms, it could be a violation of antitrust laws. We brought in Robert Martinez, an antitrust lawyer who'd helped break up tech monopolies, to look into it. What Robert uncovered was staggering. AgriGrow Solutions wasn't just one bad actor. It was part of a nationwide cartel of agricultural companies working together to control America's farmland. They called themselves the Agricultural Resource Management Association, or ARMA. These companies meet regularly to coordinate their strategies, Robert explained, showing us documents obtained from a whistleblower. They've divided up territories, fixed prices, and shared data about which farms to target. It's not just illegal, it's a direct threat to our nation's food security. The evidence was overwhelming. ARMA members had created a sophisticated system to pressure farmers into accepting predatory contracts. If a farmer refused one company's offer, another would step in with slightly different terms, but the same toxic conditions. They were essentially running a nationwide squeeze play on family farms. We took everything to the Justice Department's Antitrust Division. The federal prosecutors were especially interested in ARMA's use of data analytics to identify vulnerable farms. They had algorithms predicting which farms might face financial pressure due to weather events, market fluctuations, or family emergencies. They're not just waiting for opportunities, one prosecutor told us. They're actively working to create situations where farmers will be desperate enough to accept their terms. The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agents raided ARMA's offices across the country, seizing documents and computers. The Heritage Farm Alliance helped coordinate with affected farmers, gathering testimonies and evidence of predatory practices. But ARMA wasn't going down without a fight. They hired a small army of lawyers and PR firms. Suddenly, there were opinion pieces in major newspapers arguing that corporate farming was more efficient and modern than family farms. They tried to paint us as backwards and resistant to progress. That's when Sarah had a brilliant idea. "They want to talk about efficiency," she said during one of our strategy meetings. "Let's show them real efficiency." We organized a series of public demonstrations at member farms of the Heritage Farm Alliance. Using our drone technology and farming data, we proved that family farms were actually more efficient per acre than corporate operations. We showed how diverse, smaller farms were better for soil health, required fewer chemicals, and produced higher quality crops. Tommy turned these demonstrations into powerful social media content. Videos of family farmers explaining their innovative techniques went viral. One video, showing how Mark Thompson's regenerative farming methods produced higher yields than neighboring corporate farms, got picked up by major news networks. The public support was overwhelming. As the antitrust case proceeded, more whistleblowers came forward from within ARMA companies. We learned about secret meetings in luxury resorts where executives planned their takeover of American agriculture. There were spreadsheets assigning dollar values to family tragedies that might force farmers to sell. The final blow came from an unexpected source. A group of ethical investment firms concerned about ARMA's practices began pulling their funding from companies involved in the cartel. This triggered a wave of shareholder activism. Suddenly, these companies were facing pressure not just from farmers and prosecutors, but from their own investors. The Justice Department's case was airtight. In the end, ARMA companies faced billions in fines. Several executives were indicted on criminal charges. But more importantly, the case led to new regulations protecting farmers from predatory contracts. The Agricultural Fair Practices Act passed with bipartisan support. It banned many of the toxic contract terms ARMA had used and required agricultural contracts to be written in plain language. It also created a federal oversight board to monitor agricultural partnerships, with seats reserved for family farmers. Just when we thought we'd finally won the war to protect family farms, we discovered that our biggest challenge was still ahead of us. The victory over ARMA had exposed the corporate threats, but it also revealed something more fundamental. We needed to ensure the next generation would be able to keep family farming alive. It hit me one morning during breakfast at the Heritage Farm Alliance Center. I was sitting with a group of young farmers who'd come for our leadership program, and one of them, Lisa Martinez, asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "we've learned how to fight the corporations and protect our rights, but how do we compete with Big Ag's technology? They're using AI, automated systems, and data analytics. Most of us can't afford that kind of investment." She had a point. While we'd been focused on fighting legal battles, the big agricultural corporations had been pouring billions into advanced farming technology. They were using this technological edge to argue that family farms were becoming obsolete. That's when my son Tommy stepped in with an idea that would change everything. "What if," he said, "we created our own tech cooperative? Instead of each farm trying to compete individually, we pool our resources and develop systems that work for family farms. The idea took off like wildfire. Within weeks, we had formed the Family Farm Innovation Network, FFIN. The concept was simple but powerful. Member farms would share the cost of developing and implementing new technologies while keeping control in the hands of actual farmers. Jack, Sarah's tech-savvy husband, took charge of the technical side. He started working with a team of agricultural engineers and software developers, many of whom were children of farmers themselves. They understood that we needed solutions that would work for smaller operations, not just massive corporate farms. Our first project was what we called the Smart Farm System. It combined affordable sensors, weather monitoring equipment, and a user-friendly mobile app to help farmers optimize their operations. But unlike corporate systems that sent data to some distant headquarters, our system kept each farmer in control of their own information. The difference, Jack explained during the launch presentation, is that our technology serves the farmers, not the other way around. We're not trying to replace farming knowledge with algorithms. We're enhancing generations of experience with modern tools. The results were impressive. Farms using the Smart Farm system saw their water usage drop by 30% while maintaining or improving yields. The system's predictive maintenance alerts helped prevent equipment breakdowns during crucial planting and harvest times. Best of all, the entire setup cost about a tenth of what corporate farms were spending on similar technology. But we didn't stop there. The Heritage Farm Alliance worked with agricultural colleges to develop training programs specifically for family farm operations. We created scholarships for young farmers who wanted to learn both traditional farming, wisdom, and modern techniques. One of our most successful initiatives was the Legacy Bridge program. We paired experienced farmers with young people who wanted to get into farming but didn't come from farming families. The program included both practical training and assistance with land access through partnerships with retiring farmers who wanted to keep their land in agricultural production. Mark Thompson's daughter Rachel, who had initially planned to become a lawyer, went through the program and ended up taking over her family's farm. She introduced new crops and farming methods while maintaining the sustainable practices her father had developed. Within 2 years, she had turned their struggling operation into a model of modern family farming. The key, Rachel often says, during our workshops is finding the right balance between tradition and innovation. We're not rejecting technology. We're making it work for us instead of letting it control us. The innovation network grew rapidly. We developed systems for sharing specialized equipment that most small farms couldn't afford individually. We created a mobile testing lab that travels between member farms, providing soil analysis and crop diagnostics at a fraction of the usual cost. One of our most popular innovations was the community crop planning system. Using data from multiple farms in the same region, the system helps farmers coordinate their planting to avoid flooding local markets with the same crops at the same time. It also helps identify opportunities for crop diversity and specialty of products. But perhaps our most important achievement was proving that family farms could be more efficient than corporate operations. We started collecting data from member farms and comparing it with publicly available information from corporate farming operations. The results were eye-opening. Family farms in our network were producing more food per acre, using fewer chemical inputs and maintaining better soil health than their corporate counterparts. When we published these findings, it shattered the myth that corporate farming was inherently more efficient. Success can be a double-edged sword. After proving that family farms could outperform corporate operations, we faced an unexpected challenge: rapid growth. The Heritage Farm Alliance and our innovation network were expanding so fast that we risked losing the personal connections that made our movement strong in the first place. I remember the moment I realized this could be a problem. We were holding our annual meeting, and for the first time, we had to rent a convention center to fit everyone. Looking out at the crowd of over 3,000 farmers, I thought about how far we'd come from those first meetings in my barn. We're becoming exactly what we fought against, I confided to Linda during a break. We're getting too big, too corporate. Linda, wise as ever, had a different perspective. Mike, she said, size isn't the problem, it's how you use it. The corporations went wrong because they put profits over people. We need to stay big enough to fight them, but keep our focus on the farmers. That conversation led to what we now call the community hub model. Instead of trying to manage everything from one central location, we divided the Heritage Farm Alliance into regional centers. Each hub would operate independently while staying connected to the larger network. Tommy took charge of implementing this new structure. Think of it like a family, he explained during the transition. Each hub is like a household, making its own decisions, handling its own affairs. But we're all still part of the same family, sharing resources and supporting each other. The first test of this new model came sooner than we expected. A massive drought hit the Midwest, threatening crops across several states. Under the old system, we might have been overwhelmed trying to coordinate assistance from one central office. Instead, the regional hubs sprang into action. The southern hub, which had dealt with drought conditions before, shared their water, conservation techniques. The eastern hub organized equipment sharing to help affected farmers adjust their irrigation systems. The western hub, experienced in dry farming techniques, sent trainers to teach their methods. What could have been a disaster turned into a demonstration of our network's strength. Farms in our alliance weathered the drought far better than isolated operations. Even some corporate farms started asking about our water management techniques. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A group of young farmers in our Minnesota hub had been experimenting with AI-powered weather prediction, combined with traditional farming wisdom. They developed what we now call the Climate Resilience Protocol, a system for adapting farming practices to increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. It's like having your grandfather's almanac powered by supercomputers, explained David Chen, one of the system's developers. We're combining generations of farming knowledge with cutting-edge climate science. The protocol was so successful that the Department of Agriculture took notice. They offered to fund a nationwide rollout of the system, but with a catch. They wanted to control the data. We declined the money, but offered to share our methods if they would support independent family farms implementing the system. This led to a new phase in our movement. We started working with agricultural universities to develop what we called open source agriculture, farming innovations that would be freely available to family farms while protected from corporate exploitation. Sarah spearheaded this initiative, creating partnerships with research institutions across the country. Knowledge shouldn't be locked behind corporate patents, she argued. Farming innovations belong to the farming community. The impact was remarkable. Our network of farms became living laboratories, testing and improving new techniques. We developed better soil management practices, more efficient irrigation systems, and natural pest control methods. Best of all, every advance was shared freely among member farms, but we never lost sight of our roots. While embracing innovation, we maintained our focus on preserving family farming traditions. Each hub included mentorship programs pairing experienced farmers with newcomers. We documented traditional farming practices, not just in manuals, but through video interviews with elderly farmers, sharing their lifetime of knowledge. The community hub model proved so successful that other Agricultural organizations started adopting it. Small dairy cooperatives, organic farming associations, and even some international farming organizations began restructuring along similar lines. Just when we thought we had everything figured out with our community hub model, nature decided to throw us the ultimate test. What happened next would prove that our network was more than just an organization. It was a lifeline for American farming. It started with unusual weather patterns in the spring of 2024. The meteorologists called it a perfect storm of climate conditions. First came the unseasonable frost that devastated early plantings across the Northeast. Then, massive flooding hit the Midwest, while the West faced its worst drought in decades. I remember standing in my fields with Tommy and Sarah, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. The weather alerts were blowing up our phones, warning of another severe system approaching. But thanks to our climate resilience protocol, we weren't just watching helplessly, we were prepared. "Dad," Sarah said, pulling up the data on her tablet, "the network is reporting similar conditions across 3 hubs. We need to activate the emergency response protocol." The emergency response protocol was something we'd developed but never had to use at full scale. It was designed to coordinate resources across all hubs during major agricultural crises. Within hours, our regional centers were mobilizing support teams, sharing real-time data, and coordinating equipment deployment. What happened next showed the true power of organized family farms. While corporate operations struggled with rigid response procedures and bureaucratic delays, our network was able to adapt quickly. Farms in less affected areas sent equipment and workers to help those hit hardest. Our shared technology system helped farmers make rapid decisions about salvaging crops and adjusting planting schedules. Linda had been right about keeping our size, but staying focused on farmers. The crisis proved that being big enough to make a difference while maintaining personal connections was crucial. Every decision was made with actual farmers' input, not by distant executives in corporate offices. Matt Wilson, who ran our Midwest hub, coordinated what we called the Great Rotation. Farmers with damaged fields shifted their resources to help those who could still plant, ensuring that overall food production didn't collapse. In return, those who managed to harvest shared their profits with those who had lost crops. "This isn't charity," Matt explained during an emergency meeting. "This is family farms doing what families do, helping each other survive tough times." The corporate farms took notice. Several tried to copy our response model, but they couldn't replicate the trust and cooperation that came from years of building real relationships. Their shareholders demanded immediate profits, while our network focused on long-term survival. One incident really highlighted the difference. When the floods hit Iowa, a corporate farm abandoned their fields to protect their equipment. Meanwhile, farmers from our network worked together to build emergency levees, saving not just their own land, but also neighboring farms that weren't even part of our alliance. The media started paying attention. News crews showed up to document what they called the family farm revolution. They were amazed to see modern technology being used alongside traditional farming methods, all coordinated through our hub system. Rachel Thompson, now running her own communications team, made sure our story was told accurately. "This isn't about small farms versus big farms," she explained to reporters. "It's about the strength of community-based agriculture versus corporate farming that treats food production like a factory process." The crisis also revealed another advantage of our system: diversity in farming practices. While corporate farms with their monocultures faced total losses when their single crop failed, our network's varied approach meant that something usually survived. Farms that had maintained traditional crop diversity alongside modern techniques proved especially resilient. By harvest time, the numbers told the story. Farms in our network had managed to salvage about 70% of expected production despite the catastrophic conditions. Corporate farms averaged only 40%. More importantly, our members had preserved their ability to plant next season, while many corporate operations faced massive equipment losses and soil damage. But the real victory wasn't in the statistics. It was in the strengthened bonds between farming communities. Farmers who had once seen themselves as competitors were now working together, sharing resources and knowledge in ways that would have been unimaginable a few years earlier. They say that every crisis creates opportunity, and what happened after that devastating year proved it. The success of our network during the weather crisis caught the attention of people who could make real change happen. Not just in farming, but in how America thinks about food production. I'll never forget the day I got a call from Senator Roberts, chair of the Agriculture Committee. "Mr. Anderson," she said, "what your network accomplished this year, that's the future of American agriculture. We need to talk about making this model national policy." Now, I've been around long enough to be skeptical of politicians making big promises, but this felt different. The senator had grown up on a farm herself, and she understood what was at stake. Within weeks, I found myself testifying before Congress, explaining how our community hub model had saved not just farms, but entire farming communities. The choice isn't between modern and traditional farming, I told them. It's between a system that serves communities and one that serves corporations. Our network proved that family farms can be more resilient, more efficient, and more innovative than corporate operations, if we give them the right support. The testimony led to the Family Farm Revitalization Act, which might be the most important agricultural legislation since the Homestead Act. It provided funding for establishing community farming hubs nationwide, supported technological innovation for small farms, and created protections against corporate land grabs. But the real change was happening on the ground. Young people who had left their family farms started coming back. They saw that farming could be both traditional and high-tech, that they could maintain their independence while being part of a supportive community. Lisa Martinez, that young farmer who had first raised concerns about competing with corporate technology, now runs one of our most successful training programs. "We're not just teaching farming," she tells her students. "We're teaching community, building through agriculture." The Heritage Farm Alliance has evolved too. We're no longer just fighting against corporate takeovers. We're creating a new model for agricultural communities. Our regional hubs have become centers for innovation, education, and community support. Tommy's prediction about technology serving farmers instead of controlling them has become reality. Our smart farm system has expanded to include features we never imagined possible. Farmers can now access real-time soil analysis, market data, and weather predictions from their phones, while still maintaining complete control over their operations. Sarah's Women in Agriculture program has grown into a national movement. Female farmers are now the fastest growing segment of our network, bringing new perspectives and innovations to family farming. Women have always been part of farming. Sarah often says, but now they're getting the recognition and support they deserve. The impact goes beyond just farming. Rural communities that were dying out are coming back to life. Small towns near our farming hubs are seeing new businesses open, young families move in, and community life flourish. It turns out that when you save family farms, you save a whole way of life. Even some of our former opponents have come around. Richard Maxwell, who once tried to bulldoze my crops, recently reached out. He's retired now, and his grandchildren want to get into farming. "I was wrong," he admitted. "What you built, that's the real future of agriculture." Looking back at everything that's happened since that first confrontation with the HOA, it's almost hard to believe. What started as one farmer standing up to bulldozers became a movement that's reshaping American agriculture. The land that Sunrise Estates wanted to develop, It's now one of our most productive teaching farms, where new generations learn both traditional wisdom and cutting-edge techniques. The half-built houses were torn down long ago, replaced by fields of organic crops and sustainable farming demonstrations. My own farm has changed too. Parts of it are still growing the same crops my grandfather planted, but we've added new sections for testing innovative farming methods. Every season brings new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow. But the most satisfying change is seeing my grandchildren out in these fields. They don't see farming as something old-fashioned or dying out. To them, it's an exciting blend of tradition and innovation, a way to be part of something bigger than themselves while maintaining their independence. That's the real victory in all of this, knowing that family farms won't just survive, they'll thrive. We've shown that when farmers work together, share knowledge, and support each other, there's nothing we can't accomplish. Don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on more stories about standing up for what's right. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages about protecting America's agricultural heritage. See you in the next video!